Great. So, welcome back, everybody. That was great hearing about some of our Select Chicago community members talking about the importance of Select Chicago. I'm really excited to bring up Scott Brandwine and Shannon Happ with JLL talking about site selection during COVID and post-COVID. So I'm going to turn it over to them, let them introduce themselves, and I'm really excited to have you as part of our team today. And thanks. So take it away, Scott.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Michael, and thank you to everybody that are participating in this event. I wish we could all be in person, but we all know that that's just not possible these days. But events like this are so important to continue regardless, because the topic that Michael and his colleagues at Select Chicago have chosen is so important. Site selection is something that my colleague Shannon, who's going to introduce herself in a moment, is a very, very important topic that at JLL, maybe I should take a step back and just explain to you a little bit about JLL, and I can do that in about 30 seconds. So JLL is a global, publicly traded, Fortune 500 real estate services company that works globally. Shannon and I work out of our Chicago office, which happens to be our global headquarters. And we provide real estate services to a variety of clients. In terms of site selection, that's really focused on what we call occupiers of space. It can be a privately held family company. It can be a publicly traded company. It can be an institutional use. It can be healthcare related. It can be a college, university, government related use. So we deal with occupiers of space, and often the site selection process has them considering more than one location. That can be more than one location within a metro area like Chicago. It could be considering multiple cities. It can even be considering multiple countries. And so that's the world that Shannon and I live in. I manage relationships with those clients and run those projects. Shannon plays a critical role in helping from a research and market analysis point of view. And I'll let Shannon introduce herself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Scott. So thanks for having me on today. As Scott mentioned, we work very closely together at JLL. I lead our national GIS team for the Americas. So really what my team does is we specialize in data visualization and really all things data that is going to be critically important during COVID and post-COVID during that site selection process. And we also are experts in some of the technology tools that have been developed internally at JLL to really help with that process to make it easier and for you to make better data-driven decisions, one of which I'll demo for you today. So Scott, was there additional comments you wanted to take on the state of the market as you're seeing during COVID and what you anticipate to see post-COVID?
Well, sure. So COVID, as I already mentioned once, is on everybody's mind. So it seems like it's hard to have a conversation these days without COVID somehow being a part of it. I think it's safe to say that since COVID really started to have a direct impact on both business and our personal lives, say going back to March of this year, that there's certain things that are structural in nature that COVID is not going to change. It's obviously, I don't have to tell everybody who's watching this event and listening in the impact that it's had. So I'm not going to address that because we all know what that has been. But when it comes to site selection, I think it's safe to say that this is one thing that COVID hasn't affected, because site selection is a very long-term planning process just by nature. And so the only thing I can think of with regard to COVID that maybe might affect site selection over the long run is that it's going to help municipalities, cities, states, regions maybe to brand themselves, where some will have a better brand reputation or perception as to how government operates as it relates to how they've dealt with this COVID epidemic. So I suppose that is an upside opportunity for the government entities who are perceived as being better run, better organized, because when you are doing site selection, it's very much a long-term commitment that you're making for years or decades. And so while we don't know when we'll have another pandemic, It could be decades away, but there's always going to be the next event. And so I think the way I would frame how COVID affects the thinking on site selection is that the next big event won't be COVID, probably won't be an epidemic, it's going to be something else. And so they do look to the stability of the locations that they're going to for long-term stability and predictability with regard to these long-term decisions that they make. And the only other thing I'd add is not only is site selection a long-term commitment, but it typically is a huge capital commitment as well, and a commitment to training and hiring and maintaining a local labor force, all of which are extremely expensive, complicated, and long-term commitments. The other thing I would say with regard to site selection on a high-level basis is that because most of the participants in this call probably represent communities, again, or cities or regions in an economic development way that are trying to attract these companies or occupiers. As I said, it doesn't necessarily have to be an operating company, it could be some other use, is that the most important thing is to first inventory all of the assets that you have as an entity that's competing for these occupiers. And every community, every city, every region, every state, every country has its assets. Obviously, there's also the other side of the balance sheet. There's always liabilities, things that could be better that you're working on fixing or enhancing. But at the end of the day, the best thing to do is to focus on all the inventory and the assets that you have that makes your location attractive to these occupiers. The reality is we have to all accept the reality that we're always in a competitive environment. So, and if you pursue every opportunity, that's not necessarily the recipe for success, because then you're sort of spreading out your efforts. And I can tell you from experience that it's probably best when you're inventorying your assets to not sort of become overconfident or exaggerate what your true assets are. I would really objectively focus on the one or two, not create a long list as by nature I think positive people thinking would do. There's nothing wrong with being positive, but I would really stress the importance of focusing on one or two critical assets that you have, ideally unique, that other locations don't have, or even if there are, even if others may have the same assets, they're never exactly the same. And it's how you articulate how important those assets are and how deep they are and how you're even bettering them to make them more valuable. And the third thing I would say is be really proactive, because in the site selection process, you're typically dealing with people like me or consultants, and this that are continuously working on these projects. And one of the things that's really important to the consultants or the brokers that are leading these projects is that the clients often don't give the consultant or the person like myself running the project any extra time. We're typically working under extremely tight time frames because, the UPS saying is we go at the speed of business. The speed of business, it just continues to accelerate and more, and it's becoming more and more difficult. And it's not just COVID. This is always the case. Companies just don't, and occupiers just don't have things are changing so quickly that people just don't have a time internally at these organizations to plan far ahead. So when they do kick off a project, they typically have very tight timeframes for planning. And so just know that when you're contacted or for information, or if you're receiving RFP, or if you source an opportunity that you want to pursue proactively outside of formal RFP process or request for information, be very, very proactive. Give the consultant or the broker leading the project, not only be ready to give them all of the data that intuitively they're going to need based on experience or just common sense, but I have to stress the importance of, don't just stress the positives, tell them everything. I wouldn't highlight the negatives, of course, because that wouldn't be smart or common sense, but reveal everything. they're going to be focused on labor, infrastructure, incentives, um, the housing environment for their employees, all those things. Don't, if you sugarcoat it or only tell them things that seem amazingly positive, there's a healthy level of skepticism. So the best thing to do, I would describe it as be transparent. Don't oversell. Don't be over enthusiastic about how you have the best location. Recognize the realities that you're always going to be competing, maybe within the region or again against other states. And so try to build a relationship with the people that are doing their job representing the occupier and be transparent with them about stress the pros, but if the cons, if they're going to discover some things quickly on their own, disclose them up front and put it in the most constructive light that you can as to how you as a community are dealing with those issues, trying to fix them, and or how the occupier might want to look at them. And so I think if you do if you practice all of those things and it becomes habitual and part of your business economic development process, I think you'll find that you'll have more success. And not only in terms of the number of wins that you'll have, but more importantly, the consultants and the people that are leading these projects, you might not get the first project that you go after using this approach, but they do remember. They remember that this community or this city or this region was really great to work with. And so when they have their next project, they have a long memory. They really do. And so take a long-term view of this because you're not going to win every project. That's for sure. So I hope that overview helps, and look forward to questions from Michael and from the participants in the event.
Great to be with you. Did we want to open up to questions now, Scott, or do you want to jump into the demo?
Well, I'm gonna put Michael on the spot here since he's the moderator. That's the right question, Shannon. But I'm gonna put Michael on the spot here. Ask Michael how he would like to use the time that we have, because and Michael, what are your thoughts? That Shannon and I are prepared to however you'd like to move forward.
Back on, which is great. So yeah, I think some of this is moving forward, and what I'd like to hear from Shannon a bit is how the Blackbird software and how that you're using that as an enhancement in helping people decide where they need to select when they're landing in the United States and specifically in the Chicago region.
Yeah, absolutely. I can do a demo. Scott, we've getting some feedback from others, so if you can mute the line, that should help a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and hopefully share my screen here, and I should be able to show you guys a quick demo of this Blackbird tool that we had mentioned. So at JLL, we have already been really investing in technology even pre-COVID. It's been probably around 5 years now that we really have been investing in our technology tools for the site selection process. So hopefully you guys can all see my screen here. That's an overview of our tool here. But really what we've discovered is that people out in the market during site selection need access to data and need to be able to visualize it in a way that's really going to help them make those decisions quickly and really feel like they have a full understanding of the market. So at JLL, we've developed a tool called Blackbird. It is our proprietary 3D data visualization tool. All of the information in here is being fed in through an internal database that is managed by over 200 researchers at JLL, where their full-time job is to track buildings, track sales in the market, leases. All of that information gets included into this tool that we're able to, again, visualize the market in different ways and search for space that really streamlines the process. So I'm doing the demo in Chicago, obviously, but we do have this available in over 60 major cities across North America for the office and industrial sectors. And we also will be expanding into multifamily, hotels, data centers, healthcare, et cetera, that is in our roadmap because we found such success using this tools that all other property lines are really wanting to get their hands on it. So as you can see here on my screen, this truly is an interactive tool where we can go anywhere in the market. And really the power of the tool is having all of the data tied to the properties. So as you'll see here, I'm going to zoom in on Aon Center, which is where Scott and I typically office when we are not working from home. But really, again, power of the tool is being able to click on any one of these building polygons, and it is going to pull up all the relevant information for that building. So again, high level information regarding, the building class, the size, how many stories, occupancy, all these are going to be important for us, including owner. We also have the ability to jump into different availabilities so you can quickly see what is available floor by floor in specific buildings. We also track financial information, so asking rents and then also any sales that have been made for the building. We also track tenants. So as I mentioned, looking at leases, it's a very something is changing every single day in the market that can be difficult to keep track of. So we're able to tie all of that information and data to specific buildings and really see who is, occupying this. So, obviously some of these are going to be undisclosed just based on the confidentiality that we have, but you can see the lease sizes and people that are taking up space in this particular building. We also have, again, more information on lease comps. So it's going to be important for us to know what deals are being done in the market, not only the tenant name, but also what they're paying and what that deal structure looked like so that we're able to better advise our clients on what they should be asking for in their leases. So all of this information, again, is available for every building that is highlighted in red. So obviously a vast amount of information and data available at our fingertips here. So we truly use this tool to do virtual market touring, to get people comfortable with the city of Chicago or the suburbs. We have this available in the suburbs as well. Again, usually starting at a high level to get people understanding what makes up Chicago, really what are the market dynamics, how are we splitting up the market in terms of inventory, looking again at rents and availabilities, and using this tool to have it be an interactive conversation so that we're able to pivot wherever the client or tenant needs to go. So again, I'm just going to click through a couple of additional visuals here for you to see how we're able to view information and data in multiple ways that might resonate better with somebody that is not familiar, again, with the market here. So this is all data that I've showed you that's collected internally at JLL by all of our researchers across the country. But we also have the ability to bring in additional data sets. So again, all of these data sets come together to really give us that true understanding of the market. So downtown Chicago, pre-COVID, obviously public transportation was immensely important in the site selection process. People want to be located close to the transit lines, just because it makes it easier for people to get to the office and it makes the buildings more attractive. So obviously post-COVID, we'll see how this really shakes out, but we've been seeing increased requests for looking at parking garages. A lot of people want to know if there's a parking if people don't feel comfortable taking public transportation. We're able to add in things like parking. We're also able to add in things such as walk times or drive times around particular locations or buildings. So what we're seeing on screen now is looking at a 5, 10, 15-minute walk time around this main transit hub here. So again, this is really helpful for people that are not familiar with Chicago. They get a good understanding truly of what makes our city tick without physically needing to be here. So this has been really a very popular and successful tool, especially during COVID where nobody is traveling, that we're still able to continue on those conversations with Scott that we're having with tenants. We just don't have to completely stop because they can't physically tour the spaces. We have tools such as this that allow us to take a maybe list of 20 buildings that could fit the criteria and, put that down to maybe 3 or 4 buildings that when the time does come to tour, we're only doing those handful of buildings that we know really are going to be slam dunks. So again, just going through some additional visualization of how we can really view the market. It's really endless the way we can slice and dice the data here, looking at on screen by building class. So if you're only interested in our trophy and class A buildings, we can eliminate the rest and you can really see where those are concentrated within the market. So again, a lot of different ways to view data and do this all on the fly so that we obviously have things set up to help us better guide the conversation, but pretty much every single conversation I'm in with a client, they see something and they immediately want to pivot, oh, can you add in this? Can you look at that? Where typically if we're putting together a survey, we'll have to go back, do additional research, put together a deck or a PDF book, send it out to them, and it really just elongates that process. Where now we're really able to use a tool such as Blackbird to quickly answer those questions in real time, which is really valuable from a time perspective. And again, data really is power, and a lot of our clients now are getting very smart around it, where they really do want to see the data behind it and are not just going to take our word for it that this is a fantastic building or a fantastic location for you. They want to see the data behind it. So with a tool such as Blackbird, we're able to, again, put this in their hands and have them evaluate the market together so we can really make sure that it is going to be a good investment for them.
Yeah. Shannon, quick question, because you've been instrumental in helping build out a story map for SelectChicago and a lot of the data. Can you go talk about some of the data on the region, where that comes from so it becomes aggregated? Mainly we talk about with the information driven through census and at your disposal, we're ascertaining there's 25 million people within our boundary box. Can you talk to us on how that works?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have this story map up that we can click through a little bit as I discuss the different places we get our information. But really, again, at JLL, we're getting it from 3 different sources. The first is going to be, again, data that we're collecting internally and putting into our database and then fed through a tool like Blackbird. We're also purchasing an enormous amount of data as well. So we work very closely with Esri, which is a data provider and a mapping software. And that's how we're able to get all of those insights as to, population and growth and, where are people that are millennials, where are they living? We're able to get all that through purchase data, where typically, anybody can go on the US Census website and get data. But the differentiator for us is we're buying experts and projections on the data, since the census is only collected every 10 years. So obviously the data is not going to be completely accurate when you're looking at 10-year-old data. So we are purchasing data with the projections from experts in that field to allow us to better estimate really what that true population number is, or what the true population growth number is, and really allow us to make more informed and better decisions. So Esri is a really big one that we partner with a lot, that has a lot of this again, data more on the demographic side of things that we're seeing in this first section here, where we're seeing 9.6 million people live in the Chicagoland area, which is going to be this red outline here in the map. So a lot of people obviously are living in the Chicagoland area. And then we also are getting a lot of data just from open source. So there's, again, a lot of data out there for free out on the web that, again, we have such a large and deep team that we're able to aggregate all the information and put it in one cohesive deliverable as you're seeing today. So, when we have stats like #1 city in North America for foreign direct investment, those are going to be from various reputable sources that we're getting through publications and other things that we're able to aggregate all of this and put it together to really help you sell the city as this is a place that is going to be a smart investment for you. And going down here, this is going to be more of the demographic data that we've talked about through Esri. They have, I believe, 15,000 different variables. So it's really anything you're looking for. We likely have some sort of data point that we can pull, both on the people side of things, and then also labor is immensely important right now. Obviously with unemployment very high right now, that's kind of changed the game a little bit, but there is always going to be that fight for talent. People and companies are really starting to realize that the people at their companies are the biggest assets. So we need to locate in a place that will allow us to make sure that we are able to recruit and also retain that talent. So we also subscribe to a lot of labor and wage data companies. So we're able to see, within a 30-minute drive time, how many people are software engineers or how many people, are in the legal field and what is their average salary. So we're able to deliver all of those data points, again, to help you make better, more informed decisions. And then all these, again, market dynamics and statistics are going to be created in-house by the research team that I mentioned that is 200 strong. So we have experts at JLL that, they're not using research as a stepping stone to get into brokerage. We have people that are really passionate about this, that are, here for life, that want to be in the data and helping people like Scott, get those deals done with our areas of expertise and working together. So that's truly where we're able to use a lot of this information and data and apply it to the real world problems that we're seeing.
Yeah, and that's great. And I think that's one of the best things that I've learned over the couple of year partnership we've had with JLL, as it just keeps expanding and understanding how there are a multitude of different career paths in JLL. So with my background, I grew up with a family definitely in the commercial and residential real estate arena, and it was only solely focused on being a real estate broker. And now that's morphed, and Scott's been really great helping teach me about how he is really working with the operators of space and not the sellers of space. And Shannon is working on the data of space, and then you actually even have property management teams, I believe, as well as facilities management teams. And it really is great to have a one-stop shop as companies come in. And I know working with both Scott and Shannon as it relates to companies that we get fielded, we're working in a partnership to really talk about getting somebody to that best total fit. The panel we just had before was that other part of our stool, which is the communities. And when we have the communities working with understanding the data and understanding, having the subject matter experts like Scott talking about the space and why that's good for them, it really brings it together well. And and Scott, can you, sometimes we hear a whole bunch of different things about owners or occupiers of space when they're coming to the States. And some of it is labor, some of it is the community, and some of it is, well, my brother lives in this town, so I'm going to wind up there. Can you talk us through your experience with that?
So it's a great question, Michael, because we do look for patterns in the site selection process. And the point that you raised is sometimes familiarity is part of the equation because there's so many choices out there that they have to look for ways to narrow it down. And sometimes familiarity with is one of the initial screens that maybe objectively shouldn't be used, but that's just human nature. And so a city like Chicago, globally, people know that name. They might know something about it. Hopefully they but smaller communities, there's realistically people from even outside the state, certainly globally, are not going to be familiar with it. And so that's why it's important to That's why, Michael, I can't speak to it because I wasn't the founder like you were of your organization, but that's probably one of the reasons why you called it Select Chicago. And I know that when you say Select Chicago, it's very much a regional approach. It's not meant come to the city Chicago, it's come to our region. So I just want to emphasize that if you are a smaller community, um, under, uh, embrace the idea that you're part of a region and you're part of the Chicago region or the state of Illinois, because both of those are going to be familiar with people for sure globally, and obviously domestically. The other pattern that we see is that confidence in the government structure is very, very important, because that's the hardest thing for an occupier in a site selection process, particularly somebody that's um, an international occupier who's looking at the United States maybe for the first time. I wouldn't think of it as, most people refer to it as political stability, but that's very hard to measure. And of course, that's again human nature, it's on everybody's mind, but that's not really measurable. What is measurable is tax structures, um, key legislative uh, issues that are on the table at both the federal government level, state and local level. So that's another pattern that we see. There's more and more of a focus on on that. Don't get confused by the talk about the politics. It's about taxes, um, major legislative actions, things like unemployment compensation, or I mean, what do you call it? uh, I'm sorry, I forget the term, but which is a big issue with the state of Illinois and other states in terms of who's most competitive with workman's comp, is what it's called. So those are just a couple examples.
Yeah, and then how important is drive times for talent? And of course, that means a whole bunch of different things to different people. But when you've been very successful in working with businesses coming into the biopharma space internationally. So talk us through what was in their mind when they were looking at a tech park, and so people can kind of get a grasp of what that was like.
Sure. So this is where Shannon and our teams that do what I do at JLL, we really work hand in hand. You talk about a sort of a sea change right now, and in that when you talk about commuting, which is a really important part of the site selection analysis, because people are sensitive to to commute times for the people they're trying to recruit, and maybe employees as they try to retain them, is that, and I'm going to let Shannon add some comments on this when I'm done, is that the commuting patterns clearly have changed because of COVID. But I personally think, and it's a little early, there's no empirical data yet, although Shannon will be on the forefront of that, and she'll understand this before anybody, and including me. But I can tell you anecdotally that to commuting, this might be a fundamental shift, where what we used to think of as the headquarters or the main facility, even if it's an industrial facility, it's going to go to more of a hub and spoke system, where instead of being linked to the office, where you go there Monday through Friday and work whatever hours you do, um, you'll probably be going to we'll call it home base, because it's not necessarily an office headquarters. It can be a different type of facility, not necessarily an office headquarters. Um, that it's going to be more like a hub and spoke system, where you may work from your home some days, you may work from a shared office space, because in this close to where you live, because you either have kids at home or something that makes working at home not productive, or you might go to a Starbucks to work. And so, but you'll so so that obviously changes the commuting patterns. It used to be very predictable, Monday through Friday, going to work and coming home. But I'm going to let Shannon speak now, because the commuting pattern analysis, Shannon, what I'm learning and working with you and your team, it's becoming a matrix. It's no longer morning commute, afternoon commute. It's becoming a matrix now, because there's all these different commuting patterns for the same person. And then you have to overlay that over dozens or hundreds of thousands of employees.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are all great points, Scott. So, I mean, I would say over the last 10 years, we were seeing a major influx of companies moving from the suburbs downtown. In the last 10 years, we were tracking almost 200 companies that had moved from the suburbs downtown. We're going to see the opposite happen in the next 5 to 10 years, we're anticipating. Just as Scott's point, nobody's going to go into the office 5 days a week anymore. We're not anticipating that to happen. So we really are going to see that hub and spoke model where we're going to have, you know, just for the brand recognition, a lot of companies are still going to have their downtown offices with, you know, the signage and, you know, have those fancy offices. But there is also going to be a huge resurgence of this satellite office as well. And really the new term is not work from home, it's work close to home. So people want to be able to have that office environment, still interact with their colleagues in, you know, face to face in person, but don't necessarily want to get on a train or drive, you know, 45 minutes into the city. So they want to have some sort of touch point closer to home, which a lot of people are actually shifting back to the suburbs. We're seeing a huge shift of millennials that everybody said would never leave the city. There's a huge amount of people that are moving out to the suburbs and are starting to realize, you know, if I want the space I need to be out in the suburbs. And they're starting to reevaluate, you know, where they really would prefer to work. You know, so they don't have that huge desire to commute downtown. So we're really going to see a resurgence of the suburbs we're anticipating. And then to your original question of, you know, how far are people willing to travel? There's typically people are wanting to travel, I would say 30 minutes by car. If they're 30 to 45 minutes is really the sweet spot when we're looking at labor. But if you're looking at something like a tech park, that is really going to be a destination that people would travel more for. So you do have a greater range of people that you could really pull from. So again, we can't say there's just one specific answer to give you. We really have to look at it from all angles and consider all of the things, because it's, you know, human nature and aspect that we really have to consider all these things and make sense of what's truly going to be important in that site selection process. So that's why it's so specialized, and every project is different and new, which is exciting, I know, for Scott and I, which is why we enjoy doing it so much.
Yeah, and you know, and I think that this is a wonderful opportunity for all of the different municipalities within our Select Chicago framework, where we have the towns as far as Whiteside County, and they have access to fiber, and so somebody could have a rural lifestyle should they so choose, and then 45 minutes away they could drive to Naperville to that satellite. You know, call that second base, and home base is downtown Chicago. And so it is a very interesting time that we're starting to live in. And Shannon, thank you for bringing up that there are different classifications of labor that different businesses and companies need to do and look at, where a technology worker that can work remote really can have a farther drive time for their once a week satellite meeting, versus if you are somebody working at a manufacturing facility, you're going to want to be closer. Can you walk through those different drive time types?
Yeah, sure. So typically, as I said, for manufacturing, we usually like to honestly use 45 minutes just to really make sure we're getting the full scale of the market that you could potentially tap into. So for, the more industrial type, we are seeing a little bit, further 45 minutes. For office, typically it was really hard to say for office because they have a lot more opportunities to commute, whether that be public transportation or just driving. So again, typically we would say probably between 30 to 45 minutes, but we all know people that are driving an hour and a half. So it's difficult to say, but really whenever we're working with companies that are looking to relocate, one thing that we do is we take a look at all of their employees and map those out and do an analysis to see really for your current employee base, how far are people willing to travel, and how will moving it from a western suburb to a northern suburb, how will that affect people? Will, the majority see an increase of 5 minutes that's not going to be that dramatic. But if 75% of your employees are going to have a 20-minute increase in their commute, you're going to be looking at some issues with retention. So again, we really do look at each individual company and help them better understand their current employee base, both today, but then also in the future, right? Who do you want your worker to be in 10 years? Are you shifting to more of a tech model where you need more people that are going to specialize in that your employee base might shift a little bit. So we take all of those things into consideration. But yeah, the offices are a little bit harder to pin down on how far people are willing to work, especially now with the ability to work from home for many of those people.
Yeah, and this is more of a question for Scott. And so, and it's a really wide range what we're seeing in the suburban market, where there's still a lot of existing offices that were built in the 80s and 90s, and then you have a number of greenfield developments happening in Elk Grove Village and in Skokie as well. But as a company's coming across, when they're thinking about build to suit or adaptive reuse of existing buildings, what are you seeing as people when they're starting to really scale up in entering the U.S. market?
Well, it's a great question, Michael, because one of the things, and by the way, this applies to all communities, not just like Chicago and the metro area. As Michael mentioned, some towns that are not considered to be part of the metro area, that are in part of the region, part of the Chicago region, but not in what we would traditionally call the metro area. And so this applies everywhere, is that one of the fundamental issues that suburban properties were facing, whether particularly office properties, was that they were underparked. And that when companies started to densify their spaces and allocating less square footage per employee, all of a sudden, the vast majority, almost all, not 100%, but the vast majority of office buildings, whether they're in the enclosed suburbs or much further out in outlying communities, didn't have enough parking, because office buildings were designed for, say, 3.5 to 4,000. Well, companies were densifying their spaces where even JLL, and our density is much higher than that. So if our offices were in the suburbs, we would need probably 6 per 1,000 square feet for parking. And so that was structurally a problem. And that's changed now, because if we're all correct, and this is a structural change, not just a COVID short-term phenomenon, which we don't think it is, the suburban office buildings are no longer underparked. Because what that was causing, Michael, was a structural vacancy where I couldn't fill up my building, because if the tenants all wanted to be there at the same time, I didn't have parking. So I hope that was an answer to your question, but I can tell you that fundamentally that's the most interesting, the most impactful result on suburban office space, that we're becoming, in some cases, you have these structural vacancies that were obsolete because they didn't have the parking. That's all changed.
Yeah, that is very true. And I've been in the suburbs most of my adult life and seen the ebbs and the flows. And I think what's also will be interesting over the next 5 years is companies coming back and picking up older buildings and then retrofitting them versus building new. But also a question for you, Scott, and I don't know, Shannon, if you track this, of different communities to become more competitive. Sometimes their building codes become cost prohibitive. I didn't know, is that something that you see, that having adaptable building codes to encourage development as a benefit of a community? And I don't know if you're seeing that at all.
It's a really important question, because when you're talking about being competitive, and I spoke earlier about how companies, virtually everybody, every occupier of space, regardless of profile, they're on these schedules that almost seem impossible, but the project teams are told you just have to make it happen. And so it's not so much the building code issue, Michael, because occupiers are concerned about safety issues, public safety. Building codes I've come to learn are actually well thought out and typically follow national standards. It's the speed at which you get a building permit. And so I would shift your question to the notion of how quickly can I get a building permit? And I will tell you that the majority, not the vast majority, but the majority, so more than half of communities will look an occupier or the project team that's leading the construction or renovation project in the eye when they're courting them to their community and say, you will have our complete cooperation. We will turn around comments on your construction drawings really quickly, will be easy and great to work with, and we can expedite the permit process. And I don't think it's done intentionally, so I'm not going to call it an untruthful statement, because honestly, I don't think people do it purposely, but somehow they live in this never land world. And that, I will tell you, most of the time, it's just not true. And again, I don't think it's done consciously or to misrepresent. It's just something that, like, I'll give you a great example. More and more communities outsource their review of construction drawings for permits. And so I understand the benefits of outsourcing that, but you give up control because you now have a third party that you're relying on. In the old days, if the mayor wanted something to happen of that community, big or small, city, Chicago, or a community with 100 people, the mayor made a phone call and it was done. That doesn't happen anymore, the majority of the time.
Yes, and earlier today I got to talk about that as part of growing Select Chicago. My background is I've had an architecture firm for 22 years, and I have firsthand knowledge of some towns it's great when they send something out to a independent third party, because then you know what those code reviews are going to be. And yes, about 15 years ago, I was part of a project where we were doing a 32,000 square foot country and western bar. And from the day the gentleman walked into my office to the day of ribbon cutting was 6 months, which is beyond fast track. And it does come to having good partnerships with the cities. I know the cities that we work with, and being able to have the expert opinions of our real estate professionals as well, encouraging them to be forward thinking. I will admit that when we were doing the project for the country and western bar, the mayor looked at my eye and said, Michael, as long as you are on site every day and posting fire watch during construction, you can build 24/7, since you're the one signing off on this at the end of the day with your long-term liability insurance. And we got it done, and it was great. And there are a lot of towns here in the Chicago area that will work with companies that are coming in. And I know we only have about 3 or 4 minutes to wrap up. And I know working with both of you has been a pleasure. I mean, I very much enjoy everything that you guys bring to the table in helping build the Select Chicago model. And I wanted to really give you both kind of the last word about, beyond this structural shift, what are some other key insights that you're seeing that are coming up, and then basically some concluding remarks.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So really on my side, where I'm full into the data and technology, we're just going to continue to see that trend advance, right? That we're, as real estate professionals and firms, are going to continue to deliver that type of information and the tools to really speed up this process, and again, be able to deliver these things without physically being here. So I think, during these site selection processes, we're just going to continue to see the partnership grow, and helping people understand that it truly does matter what the underlying data is showing us, and that's really going to guide us and really help us make those smart decisions.
So Michael, thank you. This has been a great event, and I hope everybody participating in it has benefited by it. I would say that there's one thing that I want to emphasize that that I maybe briefly touched on that I want to conclude with that's really critical to the strategy of attracting companies, whether it be international companies or domestic companies that are growing here in the States and looking for a new location, is that clustering is really important. And so if you have a company in your community or in your area that has a specialty in whatever they do, it doesn't matter. Some people get confused by the fact that, well, they wouldn't want their competitor here. Well, more often than you'd think, that's not the case. Companies that require the same sort of skilled work and or expertise, whether it be in the tech side, in an office environment, or even in a manufacturing environment, they like to cluster because it's easier for them, for example, to get community colleges or others to help with their training programs, and they don't necessarily cannibalize each other for employees. It actually quite the opposite. Companies are learning that they're better off when they cluster together with companies that have similar needs so that they can build the workforce together, and they all have a bigger pool to choose from. And so, and the last point related to that is that particularly for smaller communities, your best source of business development leads are talking to the companies or the occupiers that are already in the area, because they have vendors, they have suppliers, they have their own relationships, and they have international relationships where they're either have joint ventures or maybe part of their supply chain is international. And there's a lot of onshoring back to the United States that's going to take place. And so the source of your best leads might be people that you already know, occupiers that are already in your community or in surrounding communities that can introduce you to others that might be interested in co-locating, either because it's a supply chain issue or back to the labor issue. So, Michael, on behalf of JLL, we're really grateful to continue to participate in these panels. And I know that participation in these events just continues to grow. So congratulations to you and your colleagues at Select Chicago, because you continue to grow, and not only grow, but what you're doing is a very, very important service to the communities and to the region we all benefit by. So thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. And so thank you both Shannon and Scott for your working with us today, and I definitely look forward to working with you more in the future. So thank you all for being part of our panel.